Hi everyone, welcome to our third art history lesson, and today we're going to be exploring the wonders of the Kelvingrove art galleries and museums. Hi, so that when everything all opens up again, you can go and look at some of these art pieces and maybe know a wee bit more about them. Hi, so that's the vibe. Let's get cracking. And today we're going to be looking at some works from around our very own Kelvingrove art galleries. Here it is on a very nice sunny day, very pretty. So the Kelvingrove Art Galleries and Museums opened in 1901, and it has inside it a total of 22 galleries, by which I assume it means big rooms in which they have stuff. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't think I've ever made it fully all the way around the Kelvingrove. It's absolutely massive. I always get a bit disorientated when I'm inside and kind of forgetting where I've gone. You might have heard the urban myth that the Kelvingrove was built the wrong way round, and that this side here, which we're looking at, was meant to be facing the road, because it is a fancier grand entrance, but in reality it was always planned to face into Kelvingrove Park, which is a shame because I actually really like the urban myth, so it's a shame it's not real. Okay, so this is the first work we're going to look at today. So this is Floating Heads by Sophie Cave in 2000, put up in 2006. So we're going to look at it from a few different angles. So let's just take some time to kind of form some thoughts about the piece. What kind of ideas is it giving you? What's your first impression? Do you like it? Do you not like it? Does it make you feel a bit creeped out? What do you think it's trying to convey? What do you think it's made of? I had to do a bit of research about Sophie Cave, but I actually couldn't find anything. And I couldn't find anything written about this work either, so we're just going to have to make it up. Here we go, so we've got it in a lot of different lights and lit in a lot of different ways. I think this is my favourite picture of it. This is my favourite picture. So, have a wee think. How many heads do you think there are hanging from the ceiling? Got a number in your head? All right. So there are actually 50 heads. There's 50 heads floating there. So that's quite a lot. Let's just take a wee minute and let's think about if you were going to describe this to somebody who's going to visit the Kelvingrove, how would you describe this installation? So we would call this an installation of a sculpture, because it wouldn't be the same if it was just kind of sitting down on a plinth. You've really got to arrange it in this way for it to be viewed as it's meant to be viewed, and that's why we would call it an installation. So the way I would describe it is a series of white, shiny, suspended sculptural heads. They're showing a range of emotions, and the emotions on their faces are exaggerated, and they're scattered around randomly in the air. They're not kind of in any sort of pattern that we can spot. They're all facing different ways, and they all kind of spin. And they're uplit from below to emphasize their expressions. I think I'd quite like to go and see them when it's a bit darker. I think I've always been during the day, and I think they look a lot nicer in this dark way they're shown here. So here's a close-up on one of the heads, so you can see that kind of exaggerated expression they've got there. And I think they're made of either plastic or fiberglass, and that's why they've got this kind of like shiny, almost pearlescent sheen. So there you go, this guy's looking a bit confused. This guy's looking sad. It's quite hard, there are happy faces, but nobody seems to have taken pictures of them. I don't know, people seem to most like taking pictures of the sad ones, but maybe they're easier to reach by camera, maybe. Oh, yep, here's the sad one again. There we go, so you can kind of see the happy one in the middle. So there's 3 or 4 emotions kind of dotted around, and as you can see, they're all they're all pointing different ways. So people say it's broadly confused, excited, happy, and sad. So I kind of think about this as maybe it's kind of all the different people walking around the museum having all sorts of different reactions to what's on show there. But that's just my interpretation. There we are, there's another review of them, and that's quite a nice picture. So on to our next piece. This is a portrait that's in the Kelvingrove. So looking at the style of painting here, who would you think has painted this? Okay, have you got your answer? So the answer is it was painted by Vincent Van Gogh. And we can tell here because of, one, the use of highly contrasting colour. We've got the green and the orange. Van Gogh loved to contrast in colour, but also by the thick directional brush strokes. And he hasn't been smoothing anything. He's really let the paint stay where he's put it. And it really describes kind of the shape of the person and of the background. There's a real flow to it. So this is a painting of Alexander Reid done in 1887. So let's have a wee think about where Van Gogh was in 1887. So around this time, Van Gogh was living in Paris, and he was staying in the same lodgings as Reid for a bit. So they were both staying in essentially a bit like a B&B, that sort of thing. And then this was just before he moved to Arles, and in Arles it was where he had his big breakthrough. He described it as he really came into his own. It was something about the light and the people and the community there and the landscape around him just really kind of engaged something creative in him, and this is when he did the bulk of his painting. So who is Reid? Why has he painted him, apart from the fact that he was there? So Alexander Reid was from Glasgow, and he was one of the most influential art dealers in Europe in the early 20th century. So he was a wheeler dealer guy going around buying folks' paintings and selling them on, making lots of money. So if he buys one of your paintings, it's quite a big deal. I don't think he bought any of Van Gogh's at this stage though. And he had a gallery in West George Street. So Reid's Glasgow-based art gallery, La Société des Beaux-Arts, was located in the magnificent Sun Life Insurance building, designed by William Leaper. Now, have a think. Do you know where that building is? And if so, do you know what's currently in it? It's not still an art gallery. It's now Fratelli Sarti's, which is my mum's favourite Italian restaurant. So here you go. This is the Sun Life building. That's where his art gallery would have been. As you can see, it's a very fancy building. If you're walking by, have a wee look up. And yeah, there's all these beautiful statues on it. Pretty nice, not bad. So this is another very famous painting that is in the Kelvingrove. Does anybody know what this painting is called? What do you think? So it's called Anna Pavlova, or The Red Scarf. So Anna Pavlova is who the painting is of, and the other name is The Red Scarf, obviously because there's a red scarf in it. It's painted by John Lavery in 1911. So John Lavery was a painter, and he painted landscapes and lots of nice society ladies, and he did quite a few paintings of Anna Pavlova. So this is her. You can see the resemblance there, very nice. Here's a wee close-up of her face, very glamorous, lovely hair. So Anna Pavlova was a Russian prima ballerina in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. So that's late 1800s, early 1900s, kind of Victorian-y, Edwardian-y. And she was the principal artist of the Imperial Russian Ballet and the Ballet Russe, which is, you know, big-time ballet. That's the Hollywood of ballet. If you're there, you're amazing. And if you're the principal artist, you are the best of the best. So she's most recognised for her creation of the role of the dying swan. So if you know about ballet, you'll probably know what that is. I'm not entirely sure what it is, but I imagine it's famous ballet. And she didn't just stay in these really, really famous ballet companies. She started her own company and became the first ballerina to tour around the world, including South America, India, and Australia. So if you think this is kind of happening in the early 1900s, that's pretty damn impressive, pretty damn impressive. So I think this is a really lovely painting. A few of the guys in the class have painted this actually, and they did really well. It's quite hard because her limbs are really outstretched. But I love the kind of the contrast of the orange yellow with the kind of the green of the shadow that he's used. I think it's really gorgeous. So I'd encourage you to go and see this in real life when you can. And also to have a look at some of his other paintings of Anna Pavlova, because he's done a number. This is the best one, I think, but the other ones are also really nice. So now we're on to, this is my favourite painting in the Kelvingrove when I was a little kid, mostly because of the bright colour and the gold. So can you kind of think what's happening in this picture and what could it possibly be called? So it's called The Druids Bringing in the Mistletoe, and it is by George Henry and Edward Atkinson Hornell, and it is pretty massive. It is 1.5 meters by about 1.5 meters, really big, and it's quite unusual this time for there to be a collaborative work, so there's two artists worked on this together. Yep, so that's pretty out there. So what we've got is they're painting a kind of a pagan-y Celtic scene of the Druids bringing in their sacred mistletoe. So mistletoe was a very important plant, both for its kind of healing qualities, but also its kind of role in the Druidic rituals and that sort of thing. And you had to cut it down in a special way, and there was a special ceremony for gathering it to kind of keep its magic and keep its potency. And so here you've got the Druids coming back from having that ceremony. You've got the head Druids at the front, all decked out in their fancy garb, and you've got the other ones kind of following down. And they've got this lovely big moon in the background, which I think is really lovely. I think what's drawn me to this painting has always been actually that beautiful shade of blue at the back, and that contrasting with that really bright red. I just think that's a gorgeous colour combination. And there's a few reasons that this is quite a revolutionary painting. And one is the perspective. This is quite an unusual perspective to be painting in at this time. I've got the date on here wrong. It wasn't painted in 1980. It was painted in 1890. I'll change that later. If this was painted in 1980, it wouldn't be that fancy. But for 1890, it's pretty baller. Yeah, so the kind of the tilted perspective, they almost look like they're kind of descending down that hill onto you. That was pretty wild. And also, they've used gold paint, which wasn't something widely done at the time. You would kind of paint gold effect, but you wouldn't use a shiny metallic gold paint. If you're thinking about the Victorians, that glitz and glam isn't their vibe. So this was quite a, whoa, what are you doing? So last week we learned about a certain kind of style that this painting would fit into, and it was an early example of these trends. And it was, one, the Celtic revival. It's pretty Celtic. You're drawing lots of Druids. Doesn't really get more Celtic than Druids. Also symbolism. Yeah, back into the symbols here. They're everywhere, really. Yep, so as we said, it was radical at the time because one, it was a collaborative work, so two artists did it together. That wasn't really heard of, people kind of worked by themselves. The perspective and the use of gold, and this is also painted before Klimt started working. And it is thought that Klimt took his inspiration to use gold paint from a lot of these Celtic revival paintings. So let's look at some of the details. There's a close-up of one of the lead Druids' faces. I really love, you see that bright red spot contrast with the lilac. I think that's just absolutely delicious. Really great colours there. And it's likely that this was painted a bit more like Hornell by Hornell. And if you look at kind of some of Hornell's work, he's got that kind of bit more of a patchy style of painting. It looks like there's dappled light on everyone. Because the thing with this painting is we're not entirely sure who did what, but this face looks very much like Hornell's style. Here's a close-up of those lovely bulls who are carrying down that mistletoe, and the rich textiles behind it of these capes. I think these are absolutely glorious. And this kind of textured gold paint in there, it's kind of raised in 3D. There we go, and then there's some of that snake. So the symbol of the snake, and then the symbol of this kind of golden sickle as well is very Celtic. So then these artists also did another collaborative painting, and this is it. It's called The Star in the East, and you can kind of tell what it's about. It's about the shepherds who were off to see Jesus being born, really. They saw a star in the east and they're following it, and here they are chatting to a nice angel. So it's quite a different, you can see that it's the same artist, but it's quite a different subject matter. It's very Judeo-Christian, obviously, because it's Jesus, and there's a lot, it looks a lot less Celtic, because obviously we're in the Middle East now, but the angel's still got that similar kind of robe. We've still got this use of gold, and we've still got quite, it's not painted in an overly realistic way. It's very stylized. So now we're going to have a look at this painting, which is the Glen, Port Glasgow, painted by Stanley Spencer. Here we go. So here we go. We've got a kind of a depiction of a street scene. So you've got kids mucking around on the railing. You've got a guy carrying a pipe and a basket. You've got this woman lugging all this stuff up the stairs. She's kind of got her arm twisted behind her back. I'm not really sure what that's about. And it's got quite an interesting perspective. You've got these stairs sweeping up, but you've also kind of got the canal and the tunnel going along in the other direction. You can just, it's a really busy scene. There's lots of different people interacting, and just lots of, you can tell there's lots of people travelling, lots of different ways, getting on with their daily life. It's very bustling. So Stanley Spencer might be a name you're familiar with. He was an English painter. He's most well known for painting biblical scenes in British locations. So he did a big series of kind of biblical images set in Cookham in England, and also later in Port Glasgow, later in his life. He did a big series of paintings called The Resurrection, all set around Port Glasgow. So he kind of likes to bring big biblical themes into his everyday surroundings and kind of everyday life. He was a war artist and did lots of paintings post the First World War and during the Second World War, which is kind of what sustained his lifestyle, and also some of his most moving work. And we've learned a lot about kind of life in the wars from these paintings. And a lot of his work has very strong Christian themes. His religion was very important to him, and a kind of a big motivator in a lot of his personal work. He's also painted some really beautiful landscapes and kind of botanical studies, which are absolutely gorgeous, but he kind of mostly did these for the cash. He wasn't that interested in painting landscapes or flowers, but you know, it's a nice way to earn her. So he also did some quite strange nudes, which were very like Lucian Freud. So if anybody's familiar with Lucian Freud, he does these quite disturbing paintings of people he knows without clothes. And yeah, they're quite disturbing to look at. But Spencer was working before then, and he painted similar paintings of himself and his wife, that kind of hinted at their marital issues. So they're kind of deeply personal works. So if you're interested, you can go and look at those. They are really weird though. Yep, so Spencer's work originally provoked great shock and controversy, because kind of if you're thinking, again, kind of First World War, Second World War, you're still not getting super crazy art. But so now this is seen as kind of stylistic and experimental, but at the time it was really pretty out there. Yeah, and he mostly does depictions of people doing stuff in an everyday way, but kind of draws out the interest in that, you know. Here's a picture of him. This is him in his later life. That's a self-portrait. Yep, so anyone that is familiar with Lucian Freud's work, you can kind of see kind of how Spencer's work could have influenced him there with the way he's kind of painted the muscles in the face and the skin. It looks very Freudy. Yeah, so I think this is a really nice painting. People are just bustling about. So during the Second World War, Spencer was appointed an official war artist in 1940, and the committee commissioned a series of paintings of shipbuilding and the painting of an aerodrome. So it's quite common for countries when they are having a war to employ a war artist, not only to have kind of works of art to kind of depict that point in their history, mostly to make them look good, but also, you know, to add more kind of culture around that. So it still continues to this day. You do get, there was official war artists for the Iraq War, and sometimes they focus more on kind of the impact in the country where the war is happening, or sometimes they focus on the lives of the soldiers, or sometimes they focus on kind of how war shapes people at home. So Spencer was mostly painting how people back in Britain were contributing to the Second World War effort. So in May 1940, Spencer travelled to Port Glasgow to work in Lithgow's shipyards. He filled innumerable sketchbooks with plans for a complete series of paintings detailing the activities of the yard. A scaled-down version of the plan was eventually accepted by the committee, and Spencer was set to work. The IATSI agreed to a more modest series of up to 11 canvases, which is a lot because these are huge, some of which would be up to 6 metres long, which is absolutely wild. By 1943, his enthusiasm for painting the shipyards began to wane, and he turned to a project closer to the art, the celebration of Port Glasgow. So this is when this painting would have been done, and when he's turning his life more to life around the town and just seeing how everyone else is getting on, you know. So this was painted before he started his big series of resurrection paintings set in Port Glasgow. So these are some of the paintings that were done in that original commission to be painting kind of the work of the shipyards. So as said, he did 11, and they are now apparently in the Riverside Museum. I haven't seen them in there. Maybe they're not on display, but apparently they're there. I thought they were in the Imperial British War Museum, but the internet told me I'm wrong. Yep, so this is one. This is shipbuilding on the Clyde, bending the keel plate. So as you can see, it's still got this kind of bustling, there's lots of different angles at which you can look at. It's not like the activity is all focused in the middle. There's kind of lots of different lines of activity you can follow. It's almost like a panoramic film shot, you know, when you get at the beginning of a film and they're panning across and taking in all the action. Reminds me a bit of that. Yeah, I just think it's really interesting to see depiction of all this work going on. Aye, so remember, this is 6 metres long, so it's absolutely huge. Here's another one, the Riveters, shipbuilding on the Clyde. Okay, so now we're going to look at Joan Eardley, who was born in 1921 and lived until 1963. And this painting is called Glasgow Kids, a Saturday Matinee Picture Queue, painted in 1949. So here you go, you've got all these kids queuing up on a Saturday to go see a wee film. So there's a wee bit, they're all queuing up nicely, apart from a few folk, they're having a wee scuffle in the middle. And I really like this painting. I think the colours are gorgeous. I love the kind of the pink and the yellow of the wee guy with the jacket over his head, and then kind of the middle guy's red face against the red wall. It's just a really kind of up close look at these kids and the excitement before they go to the cinema. So Joan Eardley was born in Sussex in 1929, and she moved to Bearsden in 1939 and enrolled in Glasgow School of Art. And she was inspired by the previous artist, Stanley Spencer's portrayals of ordinary working people. So after graduating in 1943, she trained as a teacher at Jordan Hill Teacher Training College, but she didn't like it. It wasn't for her, and she left after one term. And then she became a joiner's apprentice. And so in the 1940s, she's joins a small building firm in Bearsden and paints camouflage patterns on landing craft for the war effort. And this also allowed her to keep studying at GSA as an evening student until 1946. Here she is there she is in her studio, hanging out. You can see the beginnings of a painting here. So in 1949, she rented a studio at 21 Cochrane Street, which is apparently here, where this little dot is, near Pisano Pizza, just off George Square. So we're kind of coming up to the Italian Quarter, that sort of vibe. And she made chalk drawings of the local children who became regular visitors to her studio. So here she is doing a repainting of this Wayne. Many of the paintings were on scraps of sandpaper or loose sheets joined together by paper clips. So there's a wee shot of her studio with kind of lots of her sketches all dotted around. So at the time, kind of kids were just cutting about in the street. Kind of everyone's looking after each other. Big Wayne's looking after the wee Wayne's, because there weren't cars kicking about. It was a lot more people living around this area. It wasn't really the city centre yet. So she was kind of really enjoyed kind of the bustle of this life, and a bit like Spencer, she wanted to kind of capture this because there was a sense that this time was ending. There's more cars kicking about, people are having smaller families, the housing stock's really dilapidated, so they're starting to think about moving people out into schemes. So these kind of chalk rough sketches she did of the local kids were the basis for many of her later oil paintings. And she was often to be seen transporting her easel and paints around Glasgow in an old pram. And later in life, she painted landscapes when she moved out to the countryside. So here's a cute wee kiddie. I really like these because they've got so much energy and fizz in them. And I think you can just really see how much the kids maybe were fidgeting and wanting to get back outside again. Here's another wee cute one. I really like that cardigan. Super cute. There we go. So these were the basis of her paintings. There we go. So you can kind of see, here's a photograph taken by Eardley at the time. You can see how later she's used this as the basis for one of her paintings. So you can see it's realism, but it's kind of heightened realism. So she's painting what's going on around her, but she's really putting her own spin on it. It's not painted in too tight a manner. She's using lots of really bright colours. And quite often you get stories nowadays of the little kids that have grown up, and then they find a painting of them. So here's a painting of two women, and behind them, so no, there's the two women now, and behind them there's a painting of them when they're wee bairns. So there's quite a few of these about. Here's another one, and this woman, she is in the Glasgow Museum archives, and she's the wee lassie in this picture. And then we've got Pat and Anne, which I think is one of the really lovely sketches. I love that pink and yellow. You can just see Pat's really cheeky, and Anne's just kind of sitting there like, oh, what are we up to? And here's a picture of them. This family in particular were regular visits to Eardley's studio when she painted them quite a lot. So you can see the two of them there. There they are at the side. And then here they are now. That's them now. So this was a picture of them. I think they were working on a Scottish opera project, and they kind of talked about it, and then they found this sketch of them. So there they are as wee bairns, and here they are all grown up. You can definitely see who's who. And you can kind of see how these sketches feed further forward into our paintings. So this is one of our later paintings where kind of the backgrounds are becoming a lot more abstract. And so this was done in the 60s. So her style did move forward quite a lot. So she's not depicting the environment in as much detail, but she's kind of taking elements from it and abstracting them. So you've got kind of the bits of graffiti, bits of signage, kind of the shape of bricks, and also some of these kind of collaged elements here with this bit of newspaper. But you've still got these cheeky wee bends cutting about. I think it's worth looking into Joan Eardley's work if you're interested in it. And her landscapes are very interesting as well. So now this is the last painting we're going to look at today. It's quite different. So let's have a wee think about what are your first impressions of this painting. What are you kind of reading it as? So let's tell you a little bit about the artist of this painting. So this artist was an Indigenous Australian artist. So she was a physically quite small woman. She was very robust and strong. Her art is characterised by a more spontaneous approach to illustrating traditional themes, so often seen in Pintupi artwork. So I'm probably not saying that right, but Pintupi is kind of a region and a people of Australia, and so they are kind of the original inhabitants of Australia, and they've kept their culture alive. So they are the Pintupi people. Her artworks may seem very abstract, with the interplay of colours such as yellow, orange, and white, with circles and lines throughout. However, her paintings are still very much based on her dreaming, and we'll go into a bit about what dreaming is, of Kunga Kutajara, two women. So the dreaming of this person is called Two Women. The lines that are found throughout her artwork relate to the hair string ceremonial skirts that women would wear during Pintupi ceremonies. Songs and dances are performed, and these are also represented in her artworks through repetitive clusters of lines. Yeah, so we're going to learn a bit about the traditions of Indigenous Australian art. Because to us, we might, at first look, we might be like, oh, it's an abstract. You might kind of pick up on, it looks Australian, because we do associate kind of these dot works with Indigenous Australian artists. But we're going to learn a bit more about kind of the background of this painting, because we're very lucky to have this in the Kelvingrove. So this is called Artist's Country. It was painted in 1989, and it is done in acrylic paint. So you might be like, why aren't you telling me the artist's name? So the naming of Indigenous Australian and Torres Strait Islander people who have passed away was traditionally forbidden, and this practice still occurs today. So we're saying Indigenous Australian and Torres Strait Islander people because these are all different tribes. So people used to say Aboriginal, but that's kind of a Western word, and it kind of separated out the people of mainland Australia from those in the islands around them. So now people say Indigenous Australian and Torres Strait Islander people. So I've abbreviated a bit long later because that's a bit of a mouthful. But just to give you a bit of a background on why we're saying that. So it could be in the past you'll have heard this referred to as Aboriginal art, but it's changed a bit now. So yeah, so people traditionally don't say their names or refer to deceased directly by name, as one, as a sign of respect, and two, to ensure that their spirit is not called upon to return. And this has also come to include photographs, filming, and voice recordings as technology has grown. And it's really important that we kind of remember these traditions and respect them, because the Indigenous people of Australia have been so oppressed, and their culture, much like Native American people, was really suppressed. And so it's really important that we now remember it and respect it. So this artist was female. She was born around 1930 and passed away in 2011. She was born in the area of Karkur Etimja. Oh, I butchered that. Which is known in Western terms as Lake MacDonald in the Western Desert of Central Australia. So, you know, right in the middle bit where it's really hot. And she was from the Pintupi language group in the region of Central Australia. And we are really lucky to have this in Glasgow because she was considered one of Australia's most influential and talented Indigenous artists, and was considered Australia's most collectible living Indigenous artist while she was alive. And so, you know, this would have been really big money. Hopefully the artist would have got some of that money, but it's hard to know because there has been lots of exploitation traditionally around Indigenous artists in Australia, with lots of kind of art dealers kind of buying their artwork for very little money and then selling it on for big money. So hopefully Glasgow City Council gave the artist the money. So very famous, very sought after, these works. So we're really lucky to have it. So I've got up here skin name, Napanangka. So skin name is kind of like a family name for Indigenous people. It's a bit more complicated than that. There's a bit more of a system. So skin names have many different levels. So they have a male and female version, but then they also have they have a cyclical nature. So you would pass down your skin name, but the skin name has lots of different ways of writing it, depended on. So you say your mum passed on a skin name to you, you would have the female version of that skin name, but it would also be slightly altered. And then your children would have that skin name slightly altered again and slightly altered again. And it goes round and round. So in this way, you can always tell who you're related to and what your relationship is. And it brings lots of different families together as well. I'm kind of butchering the explanation of this, but we can go more into it later if we choose to learn more about this type of art, because it's really interesting. So we're going to have a bit of a chat about dreaming, because as we said earlier, this painting is a painting of a dreaming, which tells me a bit like, what do you mean? So the dreaming is quite a big concept, and it refers to the Indigenous understanding of the world, its creation and its great stories. The dreaming is the beginning of knowledge from which came the laws of existence. For survival, these laws must be observed. The dreaming world was the old time of ancestor beings. They emerged from the earth at the time of creation. Time began in the world the moment these supernatural beings were born out of their own eternity. It is an Indigenous belief. All life as it is today, human, animal, bird and fish, is part of one vast unchanging network of relationships which can be traced to the great spirit ancestors of the dreaming. So what is dreaming? Because that didn't really sum it up, did it? So in most stories of the dreaming, the ancestor spirits came to the earth in human form. As they moved through the land, they created animals, plants, rocks, rivers, mountains, and other forms of land that we know today. The ancestral spirits also formed a relationship between the Indigenous Australian and Torres Strait Islander people, the land, and all living things. So kind of the people are connected to the earth, who are connected to the animals. Once the ancestor spirits created the world, they transformed into trees, stars, rocks, watering holes. These are sacred places of Indigenous culture and have special meaning. Because the ancestors did not disappear at the end of the dreaming, but remained in these sacred sites, the dreaming is never ending, linking the past, the present, and the people and the land. Dreaming allows Indigenous people to understand their place in traditional society and nature, connects their spiritual worlds of the past with the present and the future. Oh, too far. So that's interesting. There's a lot of information in there. So dreaming is a way that culture and stories are kept alive and passed between different generations. So it's not a bit more complicated than just passing down a history, because it is a living history. People are always adding to it and learning about the past. So it's something that needs to be kept very current in the lives of Indigenous people. So one of the ways people do this is through painting these dreamings. So each different family will have their own dreaming because they've all come from different places. It's like a living history of their family and their people. So it has stayed the same, but it has also been changed. if that makes sense. So if you think about these paintings as kind of people's living history, and that's quite hard for us to imagine because we don't really have anything that is that similar. It's not really how in the West we have preserved our tradition. So it can be quite a bit to get your head around. So if you think about it as kind of the history of your family and where you have been and what has happened and the animals and the cultures and the practices that are important to you. Yeah, so we can go more into that at a later date if people so wish. But at the moment, I think we should just take time to appreciate this painting, because this dreaming would have been very personal to this artist. No one else would ever have been able to paint this, even somebody who lived very close by. It's very personal to them, where they've come from and where they are currently. And I just think it's really, really lovely. I think the colours are great. I think all these lovely patches are fabulous. I really like these kind of red shapes on this green. And you can kind of think of these as kind of like living maps. So they're not like a literal map. You wouldn't be able to read it to go somewhere, but it tells you a lot about the land, how it's been used and how the people are there, if you can read it. Bit confusing. So that's all the treasures of the Kelvingrove we've looked at today. I hope you found it interesting. I've tried to get a bit of a selection. Yeah, thanks for watching, everyone. So thank you everyone for watching today. I hope it was a little bit interesting. As ever, if you have any topics that you would like to learn more about, please give me an email and let us know. You can also comment on our Facebook posty thing and let us know there. That'd be really great. So I hope you have a lovely day. Take care, stay safe and wear those masks, you know. Bye!